Hi everyone, welcome to the Ecoside, Mossy Earth podcast. I'm Maria, and in this space we discuss nature restoration and how to help you reduce your environmental footprint. All around us, if you look carefully, you'll find signs of what has been there before us. Even our own backyard has a story to tell, if only you know what to look for. For many years, understanding which animals were around us was an essential part of our lives. Today, it can give us an insight into animal population and their behavior. Learning how to track wildlife will transform the landscape around you into the complex ecosystem that it is and help you reconnect with the wonders of the natural world. In this episode, Hannah, one of our conservation biologists, will run us through the basics of tracking, what it is about, who is it for, and how to start. Part of this episode was recorded in our latest trip to Romania, where we took the time to notice the wildlife around us.
Tracking is typically used for monitoring wildlife movements, so it's often following the signs that they leave behind in the landscape. So you follow their tracks, as in their paw prints, whether that's in mud or sand or snow. You can also track them with GPS collars or radio collars.
Although there is already great technology that allows us to track wildlife movement, scientists still need their tracking skills if they hope to trap the animals to fit the GPS collars. Tracking wildlife is an important method for conservation research. The data collected at the end of a project can help biologists to better understand and help the species in question.
It's also a great way of finding out if an animal is actually there. So sometimes you might see the signs of a carnivore that you didn't know was in your area, and you found a paw print or something like that. For example, here in Scotland, sometimes people see otter tracks in places that they didn't know there were otter there. So that can be really helpful. It can also be used to work out population densities of certain species. So for example, wolf tracking in the snow in places like Italy or Romania, they might track the local wolf pack. Well, firstly work out how many wolf packs there are in the area. They can even work out how many individuals that there are based on how many kind of lines of tracks. So wolves, they tend to follow each other in a line, but then occasionally they'll veer off. And if you then see three tracks next to each other, you could feasibly estimate that there's three individuals there, and then that might lead you to some scat, which can enable you to collect some genetic material that can then help you do some genetic analysis to determine how many individuals are in the pack. So it's a wide-ranging tool for conservation based around monitoring wildlife.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And would you say that it's just something that biologists do, or can everyone do it? Should people, get into tracking, and why?
It's definitely not just for scientists. And equally not all wildlife biologists have the skills. It's specific. Often it's really only feasible in places that get a lot of snow, because that's the easiest place to do wildlife tracking. But really anybody can go and have a walk in the woods and look out for signs of animals, whether that's pine cones eaten by red squirrels and seeing the remains underneath the tree, or even just looking for, feathers and things like that. And there are all kinds of books as well that can help you identify different tracks, even identify different scat. So if people have the interest, they're more than capable of learning these skills and getting out there.
We're in the Southern Carpathians right now, You have to be incredibly lucky to actually see an animal, since we won't probably see them. We are looking for tracks that might show what animals have been here before us. I mean, weather conditions are not the best for tracking right now, but, well, let's see what we can find.
And so usually, you look at the shape of the track, the shape of the toe pads. You should be able to tell whether it's an ungulate like a deer or whether it's a carnivore. But these are very difficult to tell. It's just melted and we can no longer tell what the original shape of the track was. And it's raining,
Yeah, we're standing in the rain right now, trying to figure out what this tracks are.
Yeah.
So, first things first, if you go out in the snow, what should you look for? When you start looking for prints, there are different things that will help you identify if a specific track belongs to the animal you're thinking of. So, although many species may have similar tracks, there are ways to clear all your doubts.
Yeah, trying to tell the difference between a wolf or a coyote, a cougar, a lynx, they're all fairly similar. Bear tracks, so the things that you will differentiate the tracks based on are the size of the track, the number of toe pads. So carnivores like wolves or lynx, they have 4 toe pads at the front, 1 at the back, but you only really ever see the 4 because the 5th one is high up. If you think about your dog, the 5th one's really high up on the leg. The bear's quite distinctive because it's huge in comparison to the others, and you can also often see the claws. But to differentiate between some of the more similar ones, like the canids and the felids, tends to be the shape of the pad. So the main pad of the paw, felids will have, it's quite hard to describe verbally, but at the back of the pad, felids will have 3 kind of lobes, and canids only have 2. So their pad tends to be more of a triangle shape. So those tend to be the things that you look out for. Often it's not possible because the snow is melted or it's too frozen, so it can make it really tricky to tell them apart. And it's almost impossible to tell apart a dog and a wolf, for example, unless you are able to follow the tracks for a long period of time, and then you can tell based on the way that the animals are using the landscape. So wolves tend to walk in a straight line. They just tend to be a bit more purposeful when they walk, whereas dogs will meander around and sniff and pee on everything. So that's a good way to tell them apart, because based on the individual tracks, it's almost impossible. Again, we're dealing with melted snow, but that could be fox tracks.
Yeah, these look really cool.
Yeah. It's a canid, it's small. I think it's probably a fox or a small dog, but it seems to be walking with intention. It's the trail is quite straight. I would if I had to guess, I'd say it was a fox.
Yeah. So what are you looking at? Just the shape,
even the number of toe pads can tell us something. So mustelids like pine martens or badgers have 5 toes, or otters, for example, they'll have 5 toes. Foxes, you'll see 4 toes, lynx 4 toes, and then between the canids, like the wolves and the foxes, they have a very different shape to lynx and other cats. So this one, looks. That's got the shape of a fox, and it's about the size of a fox track, but. And I'm just trying to find something that's maybe a bit clearer.
Yeah.
but I haven't yet found that perfect track, you know, that you can say that's definitely what we're looking at.
Yeah. So I'm missing a word here, but maybe you can help me. So you also look at like the pattern that does
The gate
together.
Yeah. So when you have snow cover like this, you can follow the path, the trail, and then you can get a sense of its gait, the way that it's walking. So that can help you tell what you're tracking as well. So that's why it's important to follow for a long enough time to be sure of what you're following.
So count the number of pads, observe the shape, its size, understand its gait, and if even then you're not sure, there are other clues you can look for in a landscape to help you figure it out. You see, tracking is a combination of things that, together, can give you a pretty good idea of the life that happens in a forest when you're not there. These clues, scientists call them signs, the same way they call the paw prints tracks. So, what signs can you look out for?
Looking for tracks, looking for the paw prints of the animal as they move along across the landscape is the first step, I would say. Because it's much more likely that you're going to cross paths with the animal as opposed to finding the one place that it's gone to the toilet, you know. So, and the tracks will help you get there. So when you follow tracks, you often then find the point at which the animal marked and so left urine or left scat. They sometimes leave things like fur or feathers. But those you just kind of happen upon. If you're following the trail of a bear, for example, you might want to check the fence posts if it's walked past, because they tend to, you know, scratch up against them, and or equally they just get caught in the fence. Here, look, you've got you see these little round. What would you call? They almost look like chocolate chips in a way.
Yeah, like tiny Maltesers.
Yeah, so that's roe deer scat.
Oh wow!
So tracking as well is not just the actual tracks, but you know, the scat, the pellets, hair, and we're lucky that obviously the snow is melted and we can see those pellets left underneath it. So,
all right. So you just complement all the little signs that you can get.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go. Yeah, so this is not the easiest place to track, but even when we're in a landscape like this, we can get a sense of what wildlife has been using it. This is something I showed you yesterday in the snow. Do you remember?
Yeah, actually, it was I want to say deer.
You are correct. Yeah, exactly. So the thing, I mean, just simple kind of differences. Deer and things like rabbits as well, hares, will leave what we call pellets. Mm-hmm. And we tend to refer to carnivore poop as scat. So, you know, these individual little, you know, almost like pieces of chocolate. Something like a herbivore, basically. That looks like roe deer to me. And, it's a nice open area. You do see deer coming out into this kind of habitat to graze, so it looks like a suitable place for them, so it's probably that.
Yeah, so right now we're walking really nice valley, and we just got a bit of an open area. Yesterday we were walking a little bit through the snow, so we were looking for tracks, and because today there's no snow, there's a few other
signs of
wildlife that we can look for and try and identify. So do you want to tell us a little bit what type of things you would be looking for?
Yeah, in this kind of habitat, without snow, there's no point looking for. You can find tracks in mud. So we could have a look over there in that dirt, basically, and go and see if we can find any tracks. Especially since it's wet, that's a pretty good place to find them. But I mean, the best thing to find in these kinds of habitat is scat, and exactly there's some right there. Do you want to ID it? It's different because that's still
different.
It's still pellets, but it's
Crammed together.
exactly.
Yeah, so
It's still deer.
it's still deer.
Yeah, but it's just that the individual pellets are clumped together, so it looks different.
Yeah, right. So now we're looking at actually Hannah is moving it with a little stick.
Yeah, that's what we do.
That's that's what biologists do.
I don't mind this so much though, because it's pretty much just like grass.
Yeah.
You know, it's just vegetation. It's just digested plant matter. You can also call these pellets. You can't call carnivore scat pellets.
Okay.
Carnivore scat is much more like human scat.
So this is all different words for poo.
Exactly. We don't want to go. Yeah, it's difficult to talk about. You know, we found a bear poop, so we make a fancy word for it, a scientific word.
Exactly. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So it's quite a bit new experience for me to pay attention to these little things in a landscape, because I would just walk around and look at the most obvious features of a landscape, completely forget that there's all these little things around me.
Yeah, and it's amazing how quickly once you start doing this and you start noticing it, then you look out for it as well. So sometimes I'll walk through a forest and sadly, like, I'll be looking at the floor the whole time because I'm looking for scat. and also just being excited by it, you know, the way that trackers are excited by scat is quite something.
Yeah, especially for the ordinary person that has never thought of it.
Yeah, and to take pictures of it as well and be like, look at this really cool scat I found.
Yeah, and so whenever now we're walking through a bit of a more grassy area, is it possible, is there anything aside from scat, or is there any other clues you can find in a landscape?
Yeah, so different animals leave different traces. So a tree like this, for example, you know, but you could find a bear rub, for example, or an antler rub, where they will be trying to mark their territory by rubbing on the side of a tree, and you can often see that, and there might even be leftover hair. It's quite obvious when you do see it. It will look like something has scraped something off the side of the tree. I mean, even things like if there was snow, for example, we'd be looking out for urine as well.
Oh, okay, right.
Lynx urine, for example, smells differently. You can actually ID it from its smell. And that's even possible to do without snow. So lynx like to mark structures in the landscape, like an old cabin or a rock. And so, you know, there have been times where I've smelt the side of an old cabin. You know, we may have found lynx tracks around there, and we can see this is where they marked. They've peed, and yeah, it's a very distinctive smell.
So it does help the more you know about a species' behavior, because you know where you should check for signs, which can help you navigate the landscape.
If you start tracking with the knowledge of the species that you're tracking, you then start to anticipate where it's moving across the landscape. So if you're having to survey a huge area, then being able to narrow down on places you think it's more likely that the animal is moving. So for example, places that hunters would stay in the wild that are now abandoned would be a great place for a Eurasian lynx to go and mark with urine or mark with its glands to basically mark its territory. So you might then target those areas when you're tracking.
Yeah, makes sense. And so for anyone that is listening that would like to start tracking wildlife, what would be your advice?
I think my advice would be to become familiar with, for example, if they're wanting to do it now in the times of COVID and they're having to stay somewhere close to home, then becoming familiar with the wildlife that they have within their area and becoming familiar with the kinds of signs that they leave on the landscape. For example, if they, it could be the small birds that eat seeds in a specific way and leave pine cones in a very distinctive way. Just becoming familiar with those details in the area that they live would be a great place to start.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So it has to do also with the work we do at home, not just randomly getting outside and expect to understand something.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of, well, actually maybe not loads, but there's quite a few expeditions that you can go on to go tracking on abroad if we're based in the UK. Places like Italy offer wolf tracking and things like that. But really, you could do it. I'm not proud to admit it, but like when I go out for a walk in the woods, I will, if there's scat that I think looks like, could be a pine marten or it could be a fox. And even now it's snowy outside. I go out looking for mountain hare tracks and fox tracks and otter tracks. So you don't have to go far.
Right, so we just found some other prints.
Yeah, so these seem to go up there over that ridge. Actually, they kind of veer off to the left there. But these are really distinctive, and so even though, it's kind of melted, it's difficult to see the definition in the tracks, but this is definitely a hare. Because you see the two... these two tracks here, one behind each other, and then two in front, right next to each other.
Oh yeah,
that's them hopping from one spot to the other. So there's a big gap between the tracks as well. And so what it does is these tracks behind are its front paws, and then the ones in front are the back paws.
Oh wow, yeah, I would have never said that. Makes total sense.
It's kind of counterintuitive, but
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
from the distance, so pretty much what we're looking at is just two little, you can describe it better maybe.
Yeah, so it's two kind of round tracks.
One right in front of the other.
Yeah, and then in front of that, really close to those tracks are two similar tracks, but right next to each other, so beside each other. So you've got the two at the back in front of each other, and then two to the side.
So they kind of form a little T.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, that's a great way to, even though you don't have the definition in the individual tracks, that pattern it can only be a hare.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty cool, and you can see it just went off.
Yeah, you can see it goes up around that hill.
While we were in the Carpathians, we never found the tracks Hannah and I were most excited to find. I really wanted to see a bear print, and Hannah, the tracks of lynx. Two species Hannah has had experience tracking.
Yeah, well, I first experienced it in Canada a couple of years back, 3 or 4 years back maybe. And that was carnivores. Snow tracking wolves, cougars, and bears. And there you'd often see bears. So, but I mean, it was always nice to see their tracks in the snow. There was one in particular I remember. We were following these tracks, and then we could see that there was an adult bear and a young cub. So it was obviously. Yeah, it was obviously we were walking in the footsteps of this mother and her cub, and then they obviously crossed paths with a coyote, because we then saw their tracks and we saw the bear tracks kind of veer off. So we assumed perhaps they'd either met or they passed by fairly recently, that one of them didn't like the smell and moved away. So you can get a really nice insight into the way that animals are interacting with each other as well. And then I spent a bit more time tracking lynx in Romania, and that was amazing because I never saw a lynx in the wild. We trapped two for conservation purposes, for translocations, but we tracked many lynx, and seeing their tracks just was super special. And that ultimately is what led us to be able to trap and translocate them for this genetic rescue project, because we could see where they were moving, and then we would set camera traps to see how regularly they would pass by that area, and then whether that was a suitable place to set a trap.
Yeah, I'm wondering, would you say that the basic techniques for tracking that don't involve any technology are still quite important then, or as important as the GPS collars, etc.?
I think so, because you're in the landscape with the animals. So GPS collars and radio collars are great because they give you a lot of information, and you don't have to, do that much field work. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but we would walk kind of so many kilometers and not see anything. So, but when you do find them, then you get a sense that okay, the animal's moved, is walking, it's walking across, or it's keeping to the understory. It's obviously not feeling like it wants to go out into the open. So you can see the fine scale details and collect really important data about the way that the animal's using the landscape. It's also it's a non-invasive technique for monitoring wildlife. So although we used it for a trapping project, you don't have to. It can just be purely for monitoring purposes, and it means that you can track them in a way that you're not interfering with, you're not causing them stress, you're not stressing them out in any way by trapping them and putting a GPS collar or anything like that.
How great is it to be able to immerse yourself in the life of so many different species without them ever noticing you? If you are interested in tracking wildlife, find yourself a journal where you can keep track of your findings. And if you do follow a track long enough that leads you to the animal, keep in mind tracking comes with a great responsibility of keeping it non-intrusive, and make sure to keep your distance. Feel free to send us any of your findings, but for now, I will leave you with a slightly strange sign you can find in a landscape you may have never thought of, but that can also help you ID the species that share this planet with us.
So there's another something else you can look out for in the landscape, a bit rarer to find. It's not typically what you would look out for when you're tracking, but if you find the kill site of something, there's even ways to tell what animal was the predator, so what species the predator was.
Oh, right.
So something like a bear predates on deer, for example, in a different way to something like a cougar. Cougars, for example, will drag their prey into some kind of secluded bit of shrub. They want to hide the kill. They also remove the hair. So if you find some bones somewhere, or some carcass, and you find a big patch of hair that looks like it's been kind of almost licked off, then that's likely to be, if you're in cougar territory, it's quite likely to be a cougar.
Right.
And as well, at kill sites, you tend to find the scat of the animal nearby as well.
So that will help you identify the predator.
Yeah. Okay. And as well, even in scat, you can understand a bit about what the animal ate. So you can almost ID different species of deer in the scat of a wolf, for example, or if it's a wild boar, or if it's eaten berries, it looks very different. So bear scats can sometimes look like jam.
Wow.
Yeah. So you'll just you'll find a pile of what looks like jam. And it's you'll know that's a bear.
Yeah.
the seeds can actually germinate in the scat sometimes. So you can often find, like in the case of Canada, sometimes these Saskatoon, they eat a lot of Saskatoon berries, and you'll find the little Saskatoon seedling popping out of the bear scat.
Helping do their part.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Just a quick reminder for our listeners, here at Mossy Earth we have our own rewilding and reforestation projects, which you can support through our membership. By becoming a member for just £10 a month, you will be contributing to the implementation of high-impact rewilding and reforestation projects, ranging from restoring kelp forests in the bottom of the ocean to supporting vultures in the Namibian Deep South. All of our projects focus on restoring native ecosystems and are designed and monitored by our conservation biologists. We also keep you up to date through on-the-ground project updates, 360 photos and aerial imagery. So if you'd like to join our projects, head over to mossy.earth and start having an impact today.